They thought he was just an overweight cook flipping ribs and brisket behind a smoker. Until the tables turned in a way no one expected. What would you have done if you witnessed it unfold? Let us know in the comment section below. And stick around, you won't want to miss this one. They thought he was just an overweight cook flipping ribs and brisket behind a smoker, until the tables turned in a way no one expected. What would you have done if you witnessed it unfold? Let us know in the comments section below, and stick around, you won't want to miss this one. Didn't have to be a fly-by to Land's shoulder for that one to turn in. Samuel Kennedy's hands moved with patient precision, even as the line stretched halfway around the cracked concrete parking lot of Big Fred's BBQ. Beneath a brown leather apron darkened by years of smoke and grease, his stocky frame seemed anchored, unmoved by the crowd's restless shifting or the relentless Texas sun beating down. His forearms, thick and crisscrossed with old scars, twisted the heavy meat hooks like they were chopsticks, flipping racks of ribs and briskets that glistened like molten gold. Nobody who stood in that line knew anything about Samuel's life before he opened this tiny pit stop off Highway 281. To them, he was the heavyset guy with a slow smile, the man who always tipped his hat and called strangers partner. They saw the worn boots, the easy way he wiped his hands on an old fraying towel, and figured he was just another small-town cook, grateful for their business. That was exactly how Samuel liked it. Inside his mind, though, things were sharper. Every customer's movement, every car door slam, every shifting shadow fell into a mental grid. A skill honed, not flipping burgers, but clearing rooms in dust-choked villages halfway across the world. Those instincts didn't go away just because you traded your rifle for a smoker. Especially when trouble was about to walk straight into your world wearing cheap leather and bad intentions. The first thing Samuel noticed about the bikers wasn't the noise, their rumbling Harleys snarling like angry wolves, or the way they shoved their bikes haphazardly across several parking spaces. No, it was their eyes. Men who were hungry for trouble always had the same look. Restless, searching, laughing too loud at nothing. The leader was easy to spot. He was tall, wiry, with a tan that looked more like it came from highways than beaches, and a patchy beard that seemed to grow in 3 different directions at once. His black leather vest bore the patch of a minor MC gang Samuel recognized from his days working security details after deployment. The Dead Snakes. Not a big-name club, not smart enough to stay invisible either. 3 more followed him. Different shapes, but the same smell of cheap beer, burnt rubber, and desperation. They swaggered into the outdoor dining area, drawing stares from families who had only come here for brisket and a little Saturday sunshine. Samuel didn't pause what he was doing. He slid another slab of ribs over to the hotter side of the smoker, calmly wiped his hands, and turned to greet the next customer in line, a mother holding a toddler on her hip. "You all enjoy the feast now," Samuel said warmly as he handed over their bag. The little boy giggled when Samuel winked at him. Moments like that, they made it all worth it. From the corner of his eye, he saw the leader peel away from his pack and head toward the counter. The biker's boots stomped hard against the wood decking. Samuel could feel the vibration through the soles of his own worn boots. Still, he didn't flinch. "Hey, fat man," the leader barked, his voice slick with mockery. "Ain't you worried you're going to fall face first into that meat? Save some for the customers, huh?" Laughter exploded from the others, loud enough that people in the line stiffened, uncertain if it was safer to pretend they hadn't heard anything. Samuel didn't even raise an eyebrow. He calmly tore a sheet of butcher paper from the roll and started wrapping a full brisket, his movements as slow and deliberate as always. "You here for barbecue or you here for jokes?" Samuel asked, not looking up. The leader laughed even harder, thumping a palm against the counter. "Hell, looks like both, don't it?" he said, leaning forward so close Samuel could smell the cheap whiskey on his breath. "Tell ya what, fat boy, give me a plate. Free for being today's entertainment." Another wave of laughter. Samuel finished wrapping the brisket, placed it in the warming pit, and finally lifted his gaze. His eyes locked on the leader's, steady and unblinking. It wasn't an angry look. It wasn't even cold. It was just fire. "You're welcome to get in line with everybody else," Samuel said, his voice as even as if he were reading a grocery list. The leader blinked, thrown for half a second by the absence of fear. Then his smirk twisted cruel. "Guess you forgot who you're talking to, boy," he said, straightening up, cracking his knuckles like a cartoon villain. "Dead snakes don't wait in line." At that moment, the crowd shifted uneasily. A father in the line stepped back with his son, shielding him subtly. Two women gathering to-go orders glanced at each other, wordlessly considering if they should just leave. Samuel sighed quietly and pulled off his apron, folding it over one arm. His brown T-shirt underneath clung to his solid frame, every thick muscle built not from lifting weights at some suburban gym, but from real labor, hard labor. The kind that didn't just build your body, but turned it into something lethal when needed. He stepped around the counter, not quickly, not aggressively, just moved with an ease that made the bikers pause. Samuel Kennedy smiled politely at the dead snakes. "Gentlemen," he said, voice low and easy, "this here's a family place. You disrespected again." He let the words trail off, not because he didn't have the rest ready, but because the silence said more than any threat could. The leader opened his mouth, gearing up to unleash something nasty, but Samuel tilted his head just slightly, the way he used to when listening for movement inside abandoned compounds. A simple tilt. The leader closed his mouth. Behind him, one of the younger bikers shifted uncomfortably, looking down at his boots. The invisible current had shifted, and they felt it. For a beat, the whole parking lot seemed to hold its breath. Then the leader chuckled. A short, humorless sound. "Just having a little fun, Porky," he said, slapping his buddy on the back. "We'll be seeing you around." The pack backed away, pretending like it was their choice, mounting their bikes with showy revs and gunned engines. Samuel watched them go, a calm smile still on his lips. He tied his apron back on, wiped his hands, and turned back to the next customer like nothing had happened. The line resumed. Conversations picked back up. Kids chased each other through the tables. It was as if the whole thing had been a mirage. But Samuel knew better. This was only the beginning. The echo of the departing motorcycles had barely faded when Samuel Kennedy shifted his focus back to the brisket pit. His hands moved methodically, adjusting the coals, misting the meat with a practiced spritz from a worn metal bottle. But somewhere inside him a slow-burning fuse had been lit. Not anger, not fear. It was something colder, something honed over years where hesitation meant death. He didn't show it. Not as he joked with the next customer, a shy teenage boy who flinched every time the door to Big Fred's creaked. Not as he accepted crumpled bills from a woman too nervous to make eye contact. The community around him was good people, hard workers, honest folks. But it only took a handful of snakes to poison a whole well. Behind the counter, inside the cramped prep room, Big Fred himself stood wiping down a giant aluminum tray. Fred was a bear of a man with a voice that could rattle windows, but today he was quiet, his shoulders tense. He didn't need to ask Samuel what was coming. He saw it the second those bikers swaggered through the lot. Fred cleared his throat and set the tray down. "You sure you're good?" he asked in a low voice. Samuel nodded, folding a clean towel slowly between his palms. "They're not the real problem," he said. "It's what comes next." Fred frowned. He'd run this barbecue for 20 years and had seen his fair share of drunk troublemakers, but something about the way Samuel said it made his stomach knot up. "Should we call somebody?" Fred asked. Samuel tucked the towel into his belt. "Not yet." His tone was firm but calm, like a man reading the weather signs before a storm. "We're not there. The dead snakes weren't going to be satisfied with one bad joke and a sloppy exit." Samuel could feel it. Men like that didn't take being embarrassed lightly. They'd be back. They'd bring more. And this time, they wouldn't settle for just laughing. He stepped back outside, surveyed the lot, took mental notes. The families were thinning out now. The smell of smoked meat still hung thick. but the warm buzz of the afternoon had shifted into a heavier, uncertain quiet. Folks pretended not to notice. They gathered up their kids a little faster, boxed up leftovers they might have stayed to enjoy, and moved toward their cars. Samuel didn't blame them. The ones who stayed were regulars, a few ranchers, a pair of old-timers who played chess every Saturday under the oak tree out back, and then there was the girl, Abby, a college kid home for the summer, waitressing part-time to save up for classes. She was clearing tables with quick, efficient movements, but her eyes kept darting toward Samuel. When he caught her looking, she tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You should clock out early if you want," Samuel said as he passed her on the way to the front lot. Abby hesitated, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "And leave you here? Alone?" Samuel chuckled, a deep rumble in his chest. "I'm old, not fragile." Abby didn't laugh. She shifted on her feet, then nodded, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. Across the road, a long shadow stretched as a battered pickup truck pulled into the dusty lot opposite Big Fred's. 3 men piled out, 2 of them wearing the same dead snake's patch stitched into the back of their denim vests. They stood beside the truck, lighting cigarettes, laughing loud enough for their voices to drift over on the hot wind. Samuel watched them without moving. The leader wasn't there, but it didn't matter. These were scouts, testing the waters, seeing if Samuel would back down. He turned away, grabbed a fresh rack of ribs, and laid it across the smoker with a soft hiss of meeting heat. If they wanted to test him, they could. Time ticked by. 30 minutes, 45. The trio across the road never came closer, but they didn't leave either. Every so often one would shout something, low insults, the kind designed to worm into a man's pride. Samuel ignored it all, until the laughter changed. It wasn't rowdy anymore. It wasn't teasing. It had a mean edge, sharp enough to gut. Samuel looked up just as a beer bottle arced through the air and shattered against the asphalt a few feet from the smoker, glass splintering like a miniature explosion. Customers gasped. A baby started crying. Abby dropped her tray with a clatter. Red came barreling out of the kitchen, his eyes wide, his hands already reaching for the old shotgun he kept under the counter. Samuel lifted a hand. Slow, commanding. "Not yet," he said. He stepped forward alone. The 3 bikers were already swaggering toward him now, emboldened by the damage. One of them, a big man with a busted nose that looked like it had been broken too many times, pointed at Samuel's chest. "You think you're tough, huh?" he slurred. "Think you're something special, 'cause you flip pork for a living?" The others cackled, their cigarettes burned down to nubs clenched between yellow teeth. Samuel didn't say anything, he just looked at them, measured them. The big man's grin faltered slightly under that gaze. Maybe he thought Samuel would bluster. Maybe he thought he'd try to fight, to puff up and trade punches like drunks in a bar. Instead, Samuel just stood there, calm as a rock in a rising river. "You gonna cry, fat boy?" one of the others jeered, stepping closer, emboldened by the silence. Another bottle sailed past Samuel's head, smashing against the fence behind him. A collective breath caught across the patio. People froze, too scared to intervene, too proud to run. Samuel finally moved. 1 step forward. His voice, when it came, was quiet enough that only the bikers heard it. "You boys have 1 more chance to walk away." The words hung there, as solid and heavy as a brick wall. For a second, the bikers wavered. Samuel saw it, a flash of something in their eyes, confusion, uncertainty. Deep down, their instincts were whispering that something about this wasn't adding up. But pride is a cruel master. The big one spat in the dirt, cracked his knuckles, and surged forward. The first mistake. Samuel shifted his weight, pivoted slightly on the balls of his feet, a tiny, invisible preparation born of thousands of hours of training. The big man swung, a clumsy, looping haymaker, the kind that might have flattened someone less prepared. Samuel ducked under it, smooth as a knife slipping into water. His left hand clamped onto the man's wrist. His right forearm drove up under the elbow, locking the arm in place. One sharp twist. There was a pop like a cork being pulled. The biker howled, dropping to one knee, cradling his limp arm. The other two charged at once, fists swinging wild. Samuel stepped in, not back, a fact that caught them both flat-footed. His elbow slammed into the smaller one's jaw with a crack that dropped him instantly. The third froze mid-lunge, eyes wide. Samuel's hand flashed out, grabbing the last one by the front of his vest, yanking him forward so their faces were inches apart. "You're going to leave now?" Samuel said, his voice calm, steady, and absolute. "Or you're going to stay and find out how much worse it can get?" The biker's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. Hard, he stumbled back, grabbing his unconscious buddy by the vest, dragging him toward the truck. The one with the broken arm staggered after them, moaning. Nobody cheered. Nobody moved. It was dead silent except for the sound of retreating boots scuffing across hot asphalt. Samuel turned back to the pit, calmly picked up his tongs, and flipped another rack of ribs. Business as usual. But in the corners of the lot, in the looks traded between ranchers and truckers, in the quick texts flying between townsfolk, a different story was already being written. The story of the Chubby BBQ cook, who wasn't just a cook. The story of Samuel Kennedy. And it was only just beginning. The day after the fight, Samuel Kennedy was back at the pit before sunrise. The rich, smoky smell of hickory already hanging thick around Big Fred's before most of the town even poured their first cup of coffee. His movements were no different than any other day, slow, steady, methodical, the rhythm of a man who had built his life around discipline. But in the quiet parts of his mind, a different rhythm pulsed. Not nerves, not fear. Something older, something that had been etched into him by the long nights overseas, where the real trouble never came when fists were flying, but in the silence that followed. The first warning sign came before noon. Fred's son, Danny, had been hauling crates of sodas from the delivery truck when he spotted it. A crude message scrawled across the side of the smoker shed in red spray paint. "Fat Pig BBQ. Dead Snakes. Rule." The kid rushed inside, his face pale, barely getting the words out, before Fred and Samuel were out the back door. Samuel stood there staring at the vandalism, the red paint dripping down the wood like blood, while Fred cursed under his breath. Fred grabbed his phone, fingers fumbling across the screen. "I'm calling the sheriff." Samuel's hand closed over his wrist gently, lowering it. "No." Samuel's voice was quiet, but left no room for argument. Fred looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "You kidding me? They're going to keep pushing till—" "They already made their move," Samuel interrupted. "Now it's our turn to decide how to answer." Fred paced a tight circle, the phone still clutched uselessly in his hand. "You got a plan?" Samuel just nodded once. He didn't elaborate, and Fred didn't push. He knew better. You don't ask a man like Samuel Kennedy to explain the storm he's about to unleash. You just hang on and pray you're standing on the right side when it hits. By afternoon, word of the vandalism had spread, not from Samuel or Fred. Neither said a thing, but from the regulars, the same old-timers, the ranchers, the parents who'd seen the earlier confrontation and now carried whispers like kindling in a dry forest. The town was small enough that secrets didn't survive long, and when people heard who was responsible and who had stood up to them, the mood began to shift. The locals started showing up in 2s and 3s, not just for the brisket or ribs. They came with brooms and buckets, rags and paint thinner. Without a word, they scrubbed the graffiti off the shed. Farmers in coveralls, high school kids on skateboards, mothers with babies on their hips. They all came, and they cleaned until the last trace of red was gone. Samuel didn't stop them, but he watched, his arms crossed loosely over his chest, a strange tightness building in his throat. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. By closing time, the parking lot was cleaner than it had been in months, but the feeling in the air had changed. It wasn't just community spirit. It was something harder, more brittle. Everyone knew the dead snakes weren't done. Everyone knew the next move was coming. They just didn't know when. It came that night. Samuel was sweeping up near the smoker pits when the sharp crack of glass shattering broke the stillness. His head snapped up instantly, instincts firing before thought. He moved fast but smooth, tracking the noise. Fred's truck, a battered old Ford that had been parked out back for years, sat on its rims, every window blown out. Around it, shards of safety glass glittered under the moonlight like ice crystals. Another message was spray-painted across the hood. "You're next, fat boy." Samuel didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Not the sheriff. That wouldn't solve this. The number he dialed wasn't one you found in a directory. It belonged to an old friend, a friend who owed him. 3 rings. A click. A low voice answered, casual but alert. "That you, Kennedy?" "Yeah." A pause. Then, "You needn't the boys?" Samuel's eyes never left the wrecked truck. Not yet. Just eyes. Quiet ones. "You got it." He hung up and tucked the phone away. It wasn't about escalation. Samuel knew better than anyone how quickly things spiraled when you let pride call the shots. This was about control. Maintaining it. Keeping the high ground. Even if it meant standing knee-deep in the mud. By midnight, Big Fred's lot was empty. Only Samuel remained, sitting on an old milk crate near the pit, the dying coals painting him in flickering shades of red and black. His thoughts drifted not to the damage, not even to the coming confrontation, but to the reasons he left that life behind in the first place. He thought of the soldiers he'd served with, the ones who came home in boxes, the ones who didn't come home at all. He thought of promises, to himself, to his mother, to the kid brother he barely knew how to raise, but somehow managed to keep out of jail and addiction. This town, this place, it was supposed to be different, a place to build something instead of breaking it. He stared into the embers until the first hints of dawn kissed the horizon. Only then did he rise, stretch the stiffness from his joints, and make the slow walk home. When he arrived the next morning, the lot was buzzing again, but not with customers. 6 motorcycles lined the sidewalk across the street. Sitting on the benches outside the old pawn shop were at least 8 dead snakes, including the leader from the day before. His patchy beard was thicker now, or maybe just dirtier, but the look in his eyes was unmistakable. This time, they weren't laughing. Samuel didn't alter his stride. He walked straight past them, head high, not giving them more than a glance. But he caught every detail without needing to stare. The way their hands rested too casually near their belts, the way their boots were positioned for quick movement. Trained habits. This wasn't about intimidation anymore. This was an open challenge. He ducked into Big Fred's, the familiar smells of meat and smoke wrapping around him like armor. Fred stood behind the counter, arms folded, face grim. "They're setting up shop, Sammy," he said. "Ain't seen 'em bold like that before." Samuel grabbed an apron from the hook, tied it around his waist, and moved toward the smoker. "They're testing boundaries," he said, "and they're about to learn something." Fred leaned closer, voice low. "You sure about this? Town's behind you, but this could get ugly." Sammy flipped a brisket, the meat crackling against the heat. "It's already ugly," he said. "I'm just not pretending it's not anymore." As the sun climbed higher, more locals trickled in. Not customers, watchers, silent witnesses gathering along the edges, leaning against pickups, sipping coffee from battered thermoses. Word had spread. Today was the day. The dead snakes lounged across the street, shouting the occasional slur, but they didn't cross the road. Not yet. Samuel kept working, moving through the motions like every other day, but every fiber of his body was attuned, coiled, waiting for the first fool to step across the invisible line. And when they did, because they would, Samuel Kennedy would be ready. not to start a fight, but to finish one. Samuel Kennedy didn't need to look at the clock to know when the temperature shifted. It wasn't just the sun beating harder on the blacktop or the way the air thickened with humidity. It was the silence. Across the street, the dead snakes had stopped talking, stopped laughing. They sat stiffly now, restless, like wolves circling before a kill. The leader rose first, rolling his shoulders and spitting a thick wad of tobacco onto the curb. Then, without a word, he started across the road. 3 more followed, boots scuffing against the cracked asphalt, leather vests catching the light. Their movements weren't casual anymore. They moved like men carrying purpose, like men who had already made up their minds about how this day was going to end. Inside Big Fred's, the customers froze mid-bite. Conversations died off in fragments. A mother pulled her young daughter closer. 2 teenage boys with skateboards eased toward the back door, ready to bolt if things got ugly. Fred's knuckles turned white around the handle of the bat he kept tucked under the counter. He met Samuel's eyes across the room, a silent question hanging in the space between them. Samuel gave the smallest shake of his head. Not yet. He pulled off his apron slowly, folded it once over his forearm, and set it on the countertop. The entire place watched as he moved through the dining room and pushed open the battered screen door with one shoulder. The 4 bikers stopped halfway across the lot. The leader smirked and spread his arms wide, as if to say, "What now, tough guy?" Samuel didn't speak. He let the silence stretch long and thin until even the birds stopped chirping. The leader took another step forward, thumbing the edge of a long hunting knife tucked into his belt. His voice was low and mocking. "You had your chance to show some respect," he said. "Could have just fed us and kept your little piggy place open." Another step closer. "But now you gotta pay." Samuel's hand stayed at his sides, loose and easy. His boots were planted firmly, weight balanced over the balls of his feet, every muscle relaxed, but ready. "I'm not feeding cowards," Samuel said, his voice even. "And I sure as hell don't serve trash." There was a collective intake of breath from the people inside the diner. The leader's grin cracked wide, full of rotten teeth and promises of violence. "You talk real big, fat boy," he said, sliding the knife free in a glint of sunlight. And that was the second mistake. Samuel didn't wait for him to close the distance. He moved, a blur of purpose, cutting the space between them faster than any of the bikers could react. His hand shot out, grabbed the leader's wrist in a vice grip, and twisted sharply. The knife clattered to the ground, skidding across the concrete. Before the others could even process what happened, Samuel pivoted, planting a heavy boot into the side of the leader's knee with a dull crack. The man went down howling. Chaos erupted. One of the other bikers lunged, swinging a chain he had looped around his waist like a belt. Samuel sidestepped, grabbed the man's momentum, and hurled him headfirst into the side of a pickup truck. The biker bounced off the metal and crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The 3rd and 4th rushed together, fists flying wildly. Samuel ducked the first punch, his elbow snapping upward into the attacker's chin with brutal efficiency. The man staggered back, spitting blood and teeth onto the blacktop. The last biker hesitated, his nerve faltering when he realized Samuel wasn't just winning, he was dismantling them. Samuel stepped closer, towering over him. "You really want this?" he asked. The biker's hands trembled at his sides. He shook his head once, sharp and jerky, then bolted, sprinting full speed back across the street toward the waiting motorcycles. The townsfolk inside the diner exploded into motion. Fred threw open the door, bat still clutched in his fists. Behind him, a half-dozen regulars poured out. Farmers, ranchers, mechanics, men and women who'd had enough of fear. Samuel didn't say a word as he hauled the leader to his feet by the collar of his vest. The man whimpered, the tough guy bravado bleeding out of him in waves. "You listen real careful," Samuel said, his voice low enough that only the man could hear. "You leave. You don't come back. You don't send your buddies. You don't even think about Big Fred's again." The man nodded frantically, the motion jerky and pathetic. Samuel shoved him away, sending him sprawling onto the asphalt. The leader scrambled up, clutching his ruined knee, and limped toward the motorcycles where the others were already revving engines in panic. They peeled out of town in a cloud of dust and roaring engines, leaving behind the shattered pieces of their pride. The whole town seemed to exhale at once. Fred clapped Samuel hard on the back, a wide grin splitting his bearded face. "Remind me never to piss you off," he said. Samuel just gave him a wry smile and picked up the knife the leader had dropped, turning it over in his hand thoughtfully. Across the street, the pawn shop owner, a wiry man with sharp eyes, tipped his cap in silent salute. By the time Samuel turned back toward Big Fred's, a cheer had started, low at first, then swelling, louder. Customers clapped, hooted, and shouted Samuel's name. For the first time since he left the service, Samuel Kennedy felt it. And not just respect, not fear, or something deeper, something like belonging. He didn't bask in it. He just nodded once, firmly, and went back to work. There were ribs on the pit that needed flipping, and customers who deserved the best brisket Texas had to offer. As the sun slid lower in the sky, the diner filled again, fuller than ever. Word spread fast in towns like this, and before long even folks from neighboring counties were pulling up just to see the man who stood against a gang, and won. Samuel kept his head down and his hands busy, but every once in a while he caught the smiles, the nods, the murmured thanks. They didn't see him as a cook anymore. They saw him for who he truly was. Not a hero, not a soldier, just a man who refused to bow down. And somehow that was enough. But Samuel knew the story wasn't finished. Victory always carried consequences, always had, always would. He would be right. Always. The next morning started like any other. Samuel Kennedy was back at the smoker before the first rays of sunlight streaked over the rooftops. The fires crackled, the hickory logs burned low and slow, and the first brisket of the day went on the grates with a soft hiss. He moved with the same steady rhythm he always did, like the world hadn't changed, like the town wasn't buzzing with the aftershocks of what had happened the day before. But it had changed. Samuel felt it in the way passing cars slowed down, drivers tipping their hats or offering quick waves as they rolled by. He saw it in the way old Mr. Delaney, the postmaster, parked his battered Ford closer to the front door than he ever had before, as if staking a claim that Big Fred's was protected ground now. Even the sheriff's cruiser had idled out front for half an hour, lights off, the deputy nursing a coffee and watching the street with a casual vigilance that wasn't fooling anyone. Inside the restaurant, Fred wiped down the counter with a ferocity that suggested he didn't know what else to do with his hands. Abby flitted from table to table, her energy bright and almost giddy. Every seat was filled. Every plate came back clean. Mayor came in just after noon, his dress shoes dusty from walking the last block after parking down the street. He wasn't a young man, but he moved with purpose, a man used to standing behind podiums and making promises. Today, though, he didn't bring speeches. Today he came with a folded American flag cradled in his arms. The chatter in the restaurant died down as he approached the counter where Samuel stood carving brisket. "Mr. Kennedy," the mayor said, clearing his throat. "You mind coming out here for a second?" Samuel wiped his hands on a towel, set down the carving knife, and stepped around the counter. The mayor turned to the crowd, his voice booming in that practiced way politicians had. "This town's always been built by the kind of folks who don't back down when things get hard," he said. "Yesterday we saw one of our own remind us what that really means. Samuel Kennedy didn't just stand up to trouble, he stood up for all of us." "On?" There was a murmur of agreement, low and heartfelt. The mayor unfolded the flag slowly, the fabric rippling with a soft whisper. "This flag flew over the courthouse for 10 years, he said. "We retired it last month, but it seemed wrong to let it sit in a box somewhere. We figure it ought to hang somewhere it means something." He extended it toward Samuel. For a moment, Samuel just stared at it. The stars and stripes, worn but proud, stitched together like the country itself, messy, imperfect, but stubbornly enduring. He took it carefully, feeling the weight of it settle in his hands. It wasn't heavy, not really, but it carried the heft of everything it represented. The crowd broke into applause. Not loud and raucous, but steady, strong. Samuel nodded once, a simple, solid gesture of thanks. He didn't have words, and even if he did, they wouldn't have been enough. Fred clapped him on the back so hard Samuel nearly stumbled. "You earned it, Sammy," Fred said, his voice thick, and then some. The rest of the day blurred into a stream of faces. Old friends Samuel barely remembered, strangers who treated him like a legend, parents nudging shy kids forward to shake his hand. The local news van rolled into town by mid-afternoon. The reporter a young woman with bright eyes and a microphone she wielded like a sword. "Mr. Kennedy, could we get a few words about what happened?" Samuel wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He looked at the camera, at the crowd gathering behind it, at the kids wide-eyed with admiration. He shook his head. "Nothing special happened," he said simply. "I just didn't let bullies win." The reporter blinked, clearly waiting for more, but Samuel turned back to the smoker without another word. The story would be told without him, and maybe that was better. By sunset, Big Fred's was running low on everything. Ribs gone, brisket down to scraps. Even the cornbread tray was empty except for a few crumbs. Fred looked around the kitchen, hands on his hips, a grin splitting his face. "I don't think we've ever sold out before dinner rush," he said. Samuel just chuckled softly, wiping down the smoker with slow, deliberate strokes. His body ached in the familiar, bone-deep way that always came after a long day of hard work. The good kind of ache, the kind you earned. As Fred locked the front door and flipped the open sign to closed, a group of townsfolk lingered on the patio. They hadn't come for food this time. They came carrying tools. Hammers, nails, a fresh signboard someone must have whipped up overnight. Samuel watched from the doorway as they worked, raising the new sign where the old weathered one had hung for years. It read, "Big Fred's BBQ, home of Samuel Kennedy, our hometown hero." Fred whistled low. "Guess you're official now," he said. Samuel shook his head, a rueful smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I'm just a cook," he said. Fred laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "You keep telling yourself that, buddy." That night, Samuel sat on the back porch of his small rented house at the edge of town, a cold beer in one hand and the folded flag resting on his lap. The stars above were sharp and bright, the kind of night sky you didn't get in the city. Crickets sang, a breeze rustled through the dry grass. He thought about the road that had brought him here, about the missions that went sideways, the brothers he'd lost, the endless weight of what he couldn't save. For years he'd tried to disappear, to bury the ranger under layers of quiet routines and smoked meat and the kind of politeness that didn't ask for attention. But maybe the world didn't need another invisible man. Maybe it needed a man who stood. He tilted the bottle to his lips, savoring the cold bite, the taste of something earned. Down the road, headlights appeared, weaving slowly up the street. Samuel tensed instinctively, the old reflexes coiling tight in his chest, until the vehicle rolled closer and he saw it was a beat-up pickup, bed loaded with wood and buckets of nails. It was the ranchers, the old men from the VFW hall, the teenager with the skateboard and the fresh black eye, all of them pulling up to his yard, parking haphazardly, climbing out with easy grins and rough, tired hands. One of them, Bill Hargrove, who ran the local hardware store, lifted a hand in greeting. "Figured you might want a hand," he said, "building that fence you were talking about." Samuel stood slowly, setting his beer down, the flag still clutched against his chest. He didn't say anything. He just nodded, and for the first time in a long time he realized he wasn't carrying the weight alone anymore. The whole town was carrying it with him, and it felt damn good. The sun rose, slow and golden over Big Fred's BBQ, spilling light across the newly built fence that stretched proudly around the lot. Fresh boards gleamed against the morning sky, each one hammered in by neighbors, friends, strangers who showed up with tool belts and work gloves and stayed until the last nail was driven. Samuel Kennedy leaned against the fence post, arms crossed loosely over his chest, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. His body still ached from the long hours of building, but it was the good kind of ache, the kind that made you feel solid, like part of something real. Fred pulled up in his old truck just as Samuel took his first sip. He climbed out stiffly, tossing a heavy duffel onto the ground at Samuel's feet. "Thought you might want this back," Fred said, grinning. Samuel raised an eyebrow. He crouched, unzipped the bag, and smiled when he saw what was inside. His old Army Ranger gear, faded but intact. His boots, his utility belt, even his battered name patch, Kennedy. "Found it all boxed up in the attic when we were clearing out storage," Fred said. "Figured maybe it's time you stopped hiding from who you are." Samuel didn't say anything. He just ran a calloused hand over the fabric, feeling the old memories stir and settle in his bones. He zipped the bag back up and slung it over one shoulder. It was heavy, but it felt good to carry. Across the street, the pawn shop owner was setting out a hand-painted sign that read "Welcome Home, Ranger" in bright, uneven letters. Kids raced around with ice cream cones, couples walked hand in hand. It wasn't just another Saturday. It was something different now. Samuel didn't expect the ceremony, but it unfolded anyway. Around mid-morning, townsfolk started gathering in the lot, carrying folding chairs, homemade banners, platters of food. Abby showed up with a tray of sweet tea so large she could barely carry it. Mr. Delaney brought a dusty American flag and a pole which he planted near the smoker with solemn care. By noon, the lot was full. The mayor climbed onto the bed of an old pickup, holding a microphone connected to a set of battered speakers. "Today's not about fights," he said. "It's about standing up. It's about remembering who we are, and who's willing to remind us when we forget." He gestured to Samuel, and for a moment Samuel thought about slipping away into the kitchen. But he stood there, letting the applause wash over him, not because he needed it, but because they needed to give it. And maybe, just maybe, he needed to accept it. Fred clapped him on the back again, practically bouncing on his toes with pride. "You realize," Fred said under his breath, "you're a dang town hero now." Samuel chuckled low. "Guess I'll have to start charging extra for ribs." Fred roared with laughter, wiping tears from his eyes. A line formed near the smoker, people waiting not just for food, but to shake Samuel's hand, to pat his back, to thank him. The first was a little boy, maybe 6 or 7, wearing a red T-shirt 2 sizes too big. He approached with wide, solemn eyes, clutching something in his hands. When he got close enough, he thrust it out, a crayon drawing of a stick-figure man standing in front of a giant grill, smiling, wearing what was unmistakably a military helmet. Underneath it, the boy had written in clumsy, proud letters, "Thank you, Mr. Samuel, for keeping us safe." Samuel crouched down to the boy's level, taking the paper with care, like it was something precious. Maybe it was. He reached into his pocket, pulled out an old Ranger challenge coin, and pressed it into the boy's hand. "You keep that," Samuel said. "It's for people who show real bravery." The boy's eyes lit up like sunrise. More people came. Old farmers who could barely stand without canes, teenagers who pretended not to be moved but wiped at their eyes when they thought nobody was looking, moms, dads, veterans who recognized something in Samuel that went deeper than just a fight over barbecue. They recognized a brother. The dead snakes didn't come back. Rumor had it they cleared out of town the same night they got humiliated. Maybe they'd moved on to some other place that didn't have Samuel Kennedy standing between them and what they wanted. Maybe they figured out the hard way that not every town was built to be pushed around. Whatever the reason, then they were gone. And the town was stronger for it. Late in the afternoon, when the shadows grew long and the first notes of an old country song floated from someone's radio, Samuel took a break, sitting on the edge of the patio, sipping sweet tea. Abby plopped down beside him, tossing him a fresh napkin. "You know," she said, swinging her legs, "I don't think anybody's ever going to mess with Big Fred's again." Samuel smiled, slow and genuine. "It's not why I did it," he said. She shrugged. "Doesn't matter. It's why we remember it." They sat there for a while, saying nothing more, letting the hum of laughter and clinking glasses fill the spaces where words weren't needed. As the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in molten orange and deep purple, Fred lit the big grill out front. Sparks floated upward like tiny stars. Kids toasted marshmallows on sticks. Somebody strummed a guitar, the melody soft and warm. Samuel closed his eyes for a second, breathing it all in. The scent of wood smoke, the sound of easy laughter, the feel of solid ground beneath his boots. This was the life he fought for. Not the medals, not the recognition. Just the chance to build something worth defending. A place where people could sit under an open sky and feel safe. Where kindness was currency and strength was measured in what you protected, not what you destroyed. He felt a hand on his shoulder and opened his eyes to see Fred holding out a beer. "Samuel Kennedy," Fred said loudly enough for the nearby crowd to hear. "The man who reminded us what it means to stand tall." Glasses clinked. Cheers rose up into the twilight air. Samuel lifted his bottle, tapping it lightly against Fred's. "To good friends," Samuel said. "And better ribs." The crowd laughed, and someone whooped loud enough to startle the crickets. Samuel grinned, tipping back the bottle, letting the cold beer chase away the last of the old ghosts clinging to the corners of his mind. Tonight, they didn't win. Tonight, family wasn't just blood. It was whoever stood beside you when the hard times came. Tonight, Samuel Kennedy wasn't just the chubby cook behind the smoker. He was the heart of the town, and nothing and no one could take that away.